But first we go back to the very birth of powered flight. No chance of seeing the Wright Flyer in the air, of course, although there is a replica of it here. Instead, we start with an extraordinary reminder of that day at Kitty Hawk back in 1903. To open the show, we join Sean Maffitt.
In the absence of a flying version of the Wright Flyer, amazing occasion of 100 years ago, so the Royal International Air Tour 2 came up with a quite ingenious idea of using this 1930s biplane trainer, a steerman, to tow a rather special banner. And in fact, this banner is exactly 120 feet long, which is the length of the Wright brothers' first flight. They're accompanied by the Blue Eagles, the Army Air Corps helicopter display team, for no other reason really than that they fly at about the same speed as the steerman, and most of the other display teams fly rather faster. But they make a nice picture together. But aviation got its first really big boost with the First World War, because as has been the case several times since, it was warlike action. So here's an example that we don't very often see in this country of a German aircraft, Albatros B-2, made by Albatros Werke. It was a reconnaissance aeroplane, never carried any armament. Flying the rather magnificent Dean aeroplane. Well, actually it's a replica. You see that very strange seating position. He's sitting well up and obviously keen to get the scarf flying there. This aircraft, but by that time, the Allied Scout aeroplanes were becoming increasingly hostile, and these B-type machines were replaced by the armed and more powerful C-class aircraft. And so from 1915 on, the Albatros B-2 became a pilot trainer. In fact, just like the Avro 504 in Britain, which had previously been a bomber, but from 1915, and for the same reasons, also became a training aircraft. This aircraft was particularly well suited to training, docile in its handling. Strong aeroplane, a slab-sided fuselage covered in plywood. To the Historischer Flugzeuggebau at Fürstenwalde, which is just east of Berlin, which calls itself the Aircraft Production and Flight Museum. It did actually have brakes, aircraft with tail wheels like this. It had a claw brake in the middle of the front axle. And Klaus Heller brings it in for a beautiful landing.
Well, from the oldest aircraft in the show, albeit a replica, we come to the newest. This is the Eurofighter Typhoon. Years late in development, billions of dollars over budget. But we should see this in perspective. Remember, the Typhoon will be in service for the next 40 years at least. Arriving at Fairford on a damp and windy press day, there was no doubt that this is the star of the show. The man overseeing its entry into RAF service is Wing Commander Charlie Chan. He sees himself as more of a systems manager than a conventional pilot. This aircraft was built for the computer generation.
It will do the vast majority of any mission unimpeded, if you like, by the pilot. It's largely about us taking decisions rather than operating the aeroplane. I don't think it'll satisfaction, but I think it is not a pure flying aeroplane in the way that perhaps, I don't know, a Hurricane or a Spitfire may have been, which required that seat of the pants type ability. This aeroplane is computer driven. It's a completely different level of technology, and it's not about manual flying.
Maybe not, but that doesn't make it any less fascinating to the next generation of pilots. The Typhoon mock-up was one of the show's biggest attractions, and as the display pilot explained, fly-by-wire is not quite what some people imagine.
When you talk about fly-by-wire and computerized airplanes, a lot of people think that everything is automatic. Well, this is not the case, because I cannot push a button and enter display mode. And then when we talk about fly-by-wire, it means that the airplane computers, you will not be able to control the airplane. But this is very important for a combat aircraft, because the more unstable you are, the more maneuverable you are, if you've got computers that can stabilize you.
Much of the Typhoon display was flown so high that it was difficult for even our cameras to get a good view of it. From a standing start on the runway, it reached 6,000 feet in less than 30 seconds. But, unusually for a jet fighter, it stayed almost entirely over the airfield, such is its turning ability. This aircraft can sustain supersonic flight without afterburner, and its rate of roll is remarkable. The RAF took these aircraft, making it the biggest customer. The other partner nations, Germany, Italy and Spain, have also placed substantial orders. The Tornado and Jaguar. It is truly a multi-role aircraft and can carry a wide range of weapons for air-to-air combat and ground attack. It also has an astonishing array of electronic countermeasures. But part of its defence comes from its sheer manoeuvrability. In this manoeuvre, it slows from 250 knots to 110 in half a barrel roll. An incoming missile would almost certainly overshoot. The first Typhoons will be based at RAF Coningsby, and it won't just be experienced fast jet pilots who get to fly them. Some will be newly qualified pilots who come to this straight from the Hawk. So that's an exciting prospect for anyone joining the Air Force today. As well as being in many ways the first of its kind, we may also be looking here at the last in a long and distinguished line of manned jet fighters. It's likely that Typhoon's eventual replacement will be an aircraft that does not require a pilot at all. For now, though, it represents a supreme achievement for everyone involved in its long development.
There are many airplanes on the line, but when I see the Eurofighter, I have no doubt in my mind what airplane I would like to be in. And so I think RAF pilots will think once they start.
Well, this aircraft heralds the start of a maritime segment. Ocean Watch is one of the main themes of Royal International Air Tattoo 2003. This is the Sea Harrier FA-2 from number 899 Squadron at Royal Naval Air Station Yeovilton. Lieutenant Chris Gertke flying it. And at the moment he's flying it as if it were just an ordinary jet fighter, flying by at perhaps 450 miles an hour. But of course the thing about the Harrier is, as well as performing like many another subsonic fighter, landings and takeoffs, because of course it has the vector control, the direction that the jet comes out of the aircraft, and here it's coming out more or less downwards. So he's slowing the aircraft down so that it's kept in the air now not by lift from the wings but by thrust from the engines, and you can see on the side of the aircraft there the vectored thrust nozzles, and they're pointing almost vertically downwards. Now these naval Harriers are going to start disbanding next year. The first squadron, 800, will disband in March 2004, and they'll reform in 2006 with GR9 aircraft. That's the RAF version, but they won't have the air defence capability that these aircraft have given the Navy. Well, that was a naval aircraft. This is a Royal Air Force aircraft, but still in the maritime role, part of Ocean Watch. This is the BAE Systems Nimrod MR2P from 42 Reserve Squadron at Royal. Have that idea of having that's because this aircraft is based on the old de Havilland Comet airliner. for Siddeley as it then was, made it into the world's first and still only 4-jet maritime reconnaissance aircraft. As Nimrod comes back towards us, you can see that its weapons bay is open. Absolutely enormous bay that can carry things like the Stingray smart torpedo, Harpoon air-to-surface missile. It even has its own sidewinder, passive and active sonar buoys. And it has huge search water radar. And that probe above the flight deck is a refueling probe. And the thing sticking out at the back is the magnetic anomaly detector for detecting underwater submarines. An amazing bank, more than 90 degrees, flown by Flight Lieutenant Phil Tett and Flight Lieutenant Elliot Harbottle. Also represented in Ocean Watch is the French Navy. This is a Dassault Falcon 10 MER. That's a maritime radar training aircraft. We can hear from the captain.
We have 6 Falcon 10 in service. You can see it's like a little fighter, and when you're training IFR pilots, and it's very nice for the pilots to training here. It's the first year we display. It's a try, I hope.
Well, Lieutenant Commander Goubeau took one of our cameras with him onto his aircraft. He was saying that it has a fighter version, but it still had the same powerful engines as the original aircraft, which gave it that more or less fighter-like performance. Lieutenant Commander Goubeau is an ex-fighter pilot himself, but he obviously enjoys the handling of this aircraft. The French Navy has it as a radar training aircraft for fighter pilots, but they also use it as a VIP transport. They're all based at number 57 Est. And here enjoys flying this nifty little machine. Operating and evaluating ships' radars and the self-defense systems that the French Navy uses.
The Ocean Watch theme continues in the static display with many types we seldom see in Britain. Maritime aircrew cover the Earth's most remote regions, from the southern oceans to the Arctic Circle. Their tasks include search and rescue, fishery patrol, and photo. From its base in Brittany, this Grumman Hawkeye is one of 2 operated by the French Navy. A third is on order. The aircraft provides an airborne radar capability similar to the larger and more familiar Boeing AWACS. But the Hawkeye is small enough to be flown from a carrier, in this case the Charles de Gaulle. These operations require a high level of skill. The Hawkeye is very capable, but flying it accurately is not easy.
It's a 5,100 horsepower per engine, so it makes it difficult to fly, especially for landing on the aircraft carrier. It's a short aircraft, and we have some rudder problems. We have to control always the rudders. Each time we move the throttles, the aircraft shakes on the yaw axis.
But of course you need a lot of power to be able to operate off a short strip.
Yeah, putting the power on one engine only.
And here's the Hawkeye caught by our cameras on departure day. In America, the French Navy has just 6 pilots qualified to fly it from their only carrier.
Well, back in the flying display, time now for the all-too-brief appearance of one of the most exciting aircraft that we see in the air. This is the extraordinary B-2A Spirit stealth bomber. Now, this aircraft is involved in a 20-hour round trip from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Well, here's the other stealth aeroplane. This is called the Stealth Fighter. Well, actually, it's really a bomber, but compared to the bomber that we saw just now, it's a whole lot smaller. And it is actually a member of a fighter squadron, the 9th Fighter Squadron, made entirely of flat facets. It is still... It carries just 2 weapons. 2 2,000-pound laser-guided smart bombs carried internally. Now, we haven't flipped a chapter here. These things are all connected. These are, of course, the Red Arrows, the Royal Air Force Aerobatic Team, in their BAE Systems Hawks, all... Because the Stealth Fighter is flown for us today by Squadron Leader Richie Matthews of the Royal Air Force. The Royal Air Force is the only foreign air force which has pilots on secondment to the Stealth Fighter Squadron. And Richie Matthews is an ex-Red Arrows pilot. He was in the Reds from 1995 to 1997. So Royal International Air Tattoo 2003 seemed like an excellent opportunity to get 2 aircraft types flying together that you would never normally see. Didn't they look wonderful together? But I know it's true to say that this would never have happened had it not been for a lot of liaison between the United States Air Force and the Royal Air Force, and the fact that Richie Matthews and the current leader of the Reds, Squadron Leader Spike Jepson, knew each other well and were prepared to trust each other to do this thing.
Good morning, sir. A greeting to Captain Matthew Kachukas from his team with the A-10 Warthog, or Tank Buster. This, of course, is a ground attack aircraft. It played a big part in the recent Gulf conflict. But it's also an aircraft we haven't seen very much at Riat. It does carry out an excellent display, as we shall see in a minute. So pre-flight checks from he comes from Pope Air, scene of that historic flight by the Wright brothers back in 1903. That was at Kitty Hawk. Captain Kachukas has got one of our cameras on board the aircraft, and he's going to talk us through his display.
I'm on the runway now performing my pre-flight checks, last-minute run-up checks, and I've just been given clearance to take off, so now I'm running up the engines and confirming with my safety observer on the ground that he's ready also. There are release brakes. The A-10 will accelerate fairly quickly. At this point I'm passing through about 50 knots, and shortly we'll see the aircraft start to rotate, and that's at 110, and the aircraft will lift off the ground immediately, level off at 30 feet, and now I'm flying down the runway at 30 feet, accelerating to about 200 knots. At the end of the runway, approaching 200 knots, and climb away from the crowd. I'm looking at the runway. I'll look back at the show lines. I'll try and find references for where the crowd is, where the center point is, how far away from the crowd I should be. I'm now running in from the show right, leveling off at 300 feet AGL, and then I'll be driving straight ahead and pulling into the vertical for a vertical 360-degree turn. This is a descending maneuver. I'm starting at 8,000 feet, and I'll end up at 300 feet. Now I'm rolled out on the show line. I'm driving towards show center, and I'm down at 300 feet AGL before I pull back into the vertical. There's a fly up into the vertical. It's about 6 Gs on where the runway is. I watch it go by once, come over the top. This time I'm about 5,000 feet AGL, about 180 knots, hanging out upside down, watching the world, and I'll turn right back up. Sometimes you'll be able to see in the corners of the aircraft the speed brakes, which are right closing to the speed brakes, gives us a faster roll rate. So normally we won't have them open, but for the demonstration, there you go. You can see them open right there and then close again. It increases the roll rate. It almost doubles the roll rate from what it is with the ailerons closed, with the speed brakes closed. After completing the turn, I'll pull up, climb away from the air show, do a 270-degree roll, and position for a strafe pass. These are simulated strafe passes. We can't put real bullets in the gun, but it's just designed to give. There I am, I'm pointed out at final, about 25 degrees of dive, watching the altimeter, watching the ground get big, and then here I go, I'm going to pull up, level off, and then immediately turn away. That maneuver is designed to keep us from going into the explosive pattern that our bullets will leave on the ground. Cruising off to the west here, and I'm slowing down to set up for the slow flight pass. I'll slow the aircraft down from about 350 knots to about 200 knots. You can see on the edges of the screen that the speed brakes have come full open to help slow the aircraft down. And then once I get below 200 knots, there goes the gear handle, and then the flaps go down also. So by having the speed brakes open when we're flying, it allows us to fly at a higher power setting in case something were to happen to the aircraft. We can close the speed brakes and immediately have additional thrust. It's quite a long show line here at Fairford, so it's a good chance for me to just take a look out at the crowd, see what's going on, see how many people are out there, and just enjoy the show.
Enjoy it we certainly did. That's Captain Matthew Kachukas in the A-10 Tankbuster.
A330, and it's going to be doing a demonstration with two German Navy Tornadoes. Now this enormous A330, this is the big wide-bodied two-engine jet, is also going to be a very good tanker. It's part of the highly successful A330, A340. They now present it as the multi-role tanker transport. It's being proposed by the Air Tanker Consortium for the United Kingdom Ministry of Defence's Future Strategic Tanker Aircraft Programme. And here is the aircraft with the two German Navy Tornadoes in the refuelling position. Air Tankers, a joint venture between EADS, Rolls-Royce, Thales and Cobham. And it's being offered by EADS. Many good reasons why this is the ideal future tanker.
If it was going to be designed from scratch as an air tanker, you'd probably end up with something like the programme is contained in the tailplanes and in the wings. The wing is more than capable of taking the weight, because obviously it takes the weight of the outboard engine on an A340. So you're able to take that engine off, risk no issues in terms of design of the wings or any of the issues of loading, which are normal craft. Tactically, you've got the benefit of the fact that you've got still 293 seats in the cabin, including in-flight entertainment, I'm told. So basically, you've got the world's best air tanker without any compromise. As you can do air tanking in the morning, troop transport in the afternoon, and freighting in the evening. And the next day, do all three on the same sortie.
In fact, could get 4 Eurofighter Typhoons from necessary en route, and at the same time carry 27 tons of freight or passenger.
Most in 50 years of powered flight, but there is plenty here at Fairford from the early years of aviation. The show organisers decided to make the static park the focus of the centenary theme, and what a lineup it is. More than 200 aircraft are on show here. Some have flown in, some of them no longer fly, and have come by road from museums and private collections throughout the country. There's a distinctly British feel to this part of the site, a reminder of the great days and the great names of a proud aviation industry. Though it still thrives in projects like the Typhoon and Airbus, perhaps some of the romance has gone. Not so the spirit of cooperation, however. This replica of the Wright Flyer lives at the Yorkshire Air Museum. Too large for road transport, it was brought to Fairford by the RAF in a of fame. Built in the 1960s, this aircraft has been immaculately restored after suffering some indignity.
A mobile display in a shopping mall in Leeds. They obviously wanted to change around, so it came up for sale. We purchased it and renovated it to the standard that you see now. It's exactly to scale. The engine, the wings, everything is to scale. We've had to use modern fabrics to give it a longer life than what it had previously.
The machine was flown from a lying position. Pitch control was almost conventional, but roll was achieved by a body movement which warped the wings. How awkward was this? No, it had definitely started something. Within 6 years, Blériot had flown the English Channel, and the first pioneers of air travel were beginning to emerge. Soon the aeroplane was a weapon of war, with British makers at the forefront of technology and the birth of the Royal Air Force. Then came 2 decades of rapid civil development through the interwar years. There were the Hendon Air pageants, the biplane trainers, and graceful transports like this de Havilland-Foxmoth. Modern light aircraft would struggle to match its performance on such a small engine, and few indeed could match its style.
It's pretty amazing to be able to... Surprisingly, this aeroplane's got the 145 horse engine in it, and it does exceptionally well. It's the only aeroplane I know that gets wider from the cockpit forward, so it's very difficult to see out, but the instrument panel is in 2 separate bits with a porthole in the middle so that you can see through to the passenger cabin, pass them notes and have your sandwiches passed up if you're on a long trip.
But sedate travel for the wealthy few would not be the future of air transport. The Douglas DC-2 was the forerunner of perhaps the century's most successful family of airliners. They would make flying larger and larger aircraft. This example is a visit to a major American airline. Production of the DC-2 would be short-lived.
The DC-2 was built in order for TWA, but as soon as they got it, they noticed that it was too small. It can only carry 8 to 12 passengers. The DC-3 was immediately afterwards developed and could carry up to 28.
This DC-2 has been flying almost continuously for the last 68 years. Its owners rely on show appearances to pay for its upkeep. This was it departing from Fairford. Let's hope we see it again someday. Our tour of this fascinating collection now moves on to the Second World War. Such is the current fascination for warbirds. More than 50 Spitfires survive, around half of them in this country. This, though, is one of just 2 airworthy Lancasters. It's the flagship of the RAF's Battle of Britain Memorial Flight, although it took no part in that campaign. This Blenheim came to Fairford as the only flying example in the world.
Support the only airworthy Blenheim flight in the world today. Have a chance to win a flight in a Spitfire or a Vampire. Tickets are only £1 each. Get your tickets here today.
Just a month after the show came sad news for the Blenheim supporters. It was seriously damaged, and we now move on to the jet age and some classics from the 50s and 60s. Fighter bomber. America's F-86 Sabre, one of the first aircraft to go supersonic, and the rather tricky Gnat, which was used by the Red Arrows before the arrival of the Hawk. The Canberra is still in RAF service more than 50 years after it first flew. The makers, though, had other plans for this example as the flight envelope.
It never actually saw active RAF service. It went straight to have a Scorpion rocket motor mounted in the back. And in 1957, it got the world altitude record at 70,310 feet. It's actually the last one flying in private hands in the UK at the moment. There's 1 or 2 in Australia and a couple in the USA.
You could easily spend an entire day at this centenary exhibition, and I doubt if even the most knowledgeable enthusiast would recognise everything on show. Of course, here we're right up to date with the C-17 from nearby Brize Norton, the very one that brought the Wright Flyer replica to the show.
The Lockheed Martin Alenia C-27J Spartan, brand new transport aircraft. If it looks like, well, roughly half a Hercules, that's really what it is. It has plenty in common with the C-130. Evangelisti on the left and Agostino Frediani on the right. This aircraft in September 1999. a lot of commonality with the Hercules, which is why Lockheed Martin came in with Alenia to build this aircraft. It has the same engines that the Hercules has, except that there are Italian Air Force have ordered 12 of these aircraft, and Greece has also ordered 12. It has an opening ramp at the back. It's capable of carrying military vehicles like Humvees and small armoured vehicles, and it will also drop paratroops. Capable at its maximum speed of about 360 miles an hour. Also capable of very short landings intact. Gianluca Evangelisti puts it down on all 6 wheels at once and immediately puts the engines into reverse thrust, so the aircraft slows down very quickly for a very short landing. Leaving the reverse thrust in, of course, means that the aircraft can also go backwards.
Aeroplane, we also celebrate a milestone for the French national display team La Patrie de France. In their 50th anniversary year, they've been breaking new ground. They gave their first display in Russia, something that would have been unthinkable when the team was formed back in 1953. Is it good enough for their full display? If not, they will carry out their intermediate show, for which they need a cloud base of 3,000 feet. We could see a mixture of both displays. There are several points at which team leader Christophe Giraud can tell his pilots to switch from one routine to another.
I can change to intermediate to good weather or bad weather. I can change several times, different time during the show. It's difficult. It's more difficult switch from bad weather to good weather.
Like most of the great display teams, La Patrie have a party piece which is all their own. Here we see it filmed from the air in a recent display over southern France. The aircraft invert in 2 pairs and 1 group of 3, leaving only the leader flying the right way up. This is a difficult maneuver in tight formation.
It's one of the most technical maneuver of the Patrie, and it is allowed by the Alpha Jet, which is excellent for that kind of maneuver.
Back to Fairford and the takeoff from the Fairford runway in 2 sections of 4, making 8 aircraft altogether. And the 50-year celebration, of course 50 years making them exactly half the age of the... And the formation spreads out a little so that they can do an interesting manoeuvre, a 360-degree individual roll from each aircraft. And then they close the formation up again. They call this formation diamond, although actually it's missing the bottom point of the diamond. Unlike the Hawk, this is a high-wing aircraft, the wing on top of the fuselage rather than underneath. And underneath, in the magnificent paint job that they have on these aircraft, you can see Armée de l'Air, literally the Air Army, or as we would say, the Air Force. In flesh formation there, meaning arrow. But now coming next, the manoeuvre that we saw from the inside of the formation just now, when everybody rolls upside down except the leader. And the last 2 to roll out do it as a rollback. into a magnificent palm tree. Having split up, two pairs of aircraft heading towards each other to cross over in the middle of the runway, silhouetted against the lowering sun. Now, something that the Red Arrows also do, an amazing jippo brake. For hearts made out of smoke coming from aeroplanes, this one seems to be enduring. With love, from the Patrouille de France.
Well, that's just about it on a weekend in which we've marked the centenary of that astonishing achievement by the Wright brothers. 100 years and will of powered flight. Next year's Royal International Air Tattoo will be another special show when all the armed services will be taking part in a special RAF Fairford. It's goodbye.